We're really excited because we have a lot of interesting information to go through related to sales order processing today. So today we're going to dive a little deeper into that module and go through some topics that we've heard from a lot of users that can be confusing, and then also some areas that aren't usually heavily used that we've seen a lot of our clients get a lot of advantage by using those areas. Okay, so we're going to move into our agenda here. And so I can just go through and show you some of the topics that we'll go through today. So as I mentioned, we'll start out looking at some of the areas that are a little confusing, and that's mainly related to allocation. So we'll look at the sales order processing document setup options and talk about some of the different item allocation options that are out there. And then we'll dive into some areas that just some tips and tricks that make processing in sales order processing a lot faster and easier. So we'll look at how to quickly create inventory items and then tie that into how they relate to their default posting accounts. That can also be a stumbling block for a lot of users. So we'll want to clarify the default accounts. And then we'll look at how we can use substitute items at both the customer and the item level and understand the difference. And then we'll look into how you can generate purchase orders directly from sales orders when you don't have that inventory on hand. So that's a big time saver there. And we'll look at the feature that we have where you can consolidate multiple sales orders into a single invoice. And then we'll look at just the quickest way to create returns and how you're able to create sales returns directly from posted invoices in the system. Okay, so we'll get started with our first two bullet points on here. So I'm going to move over to Dynamics GP. And I am currently in the most recent release, so I'm in Dynamics GP 2018 R2. So there are a few new features in that version that you might see if you're not on that latest version. So definitely let us know if you're on an older version and you're interested in getting current with your environment, because there's a lot of new features that came out recently with R2. Okay, so I'm going to start out by going to the sales order processing setup window, and I'll just browse out through the menu here and go to setup, sales, and sales order processing. And in here, I'll look at the order ID. So we're going to focus on some of the different options that we have related to the sales order processing setup. So whenever you create a transaction using the sales transaction entry window, you have a type ID that you use, and this is where those get set up. And then all the options related to that transaction are defined in this window here. So in this case, what I've done is I've created a couple different ones here just that we can use for our example today. And so we can look at the allocation options here. So the first one I'm going to pick is this ORD line that I created. And you'll notice that in here, we have this option to allocate by. So I have this one set to allocate by line item. And we'll go through an example of each one so you can see the difference. And basically, when you choose to allocate by line item, every time you go into a line item on your order, the system's going to check to see if there's quantity available for that item. And if there isn't, you'll receive a prompt and you'll have to tell the system what to do to get past that shortage. So it's going to do that for every single item. The advantage is you're kind of going through as you're ordering the items and finding out if they're available. The disadvantage is it can slow it down a little bit. So there is another option on here where it doesn't need to check for every single item. And I set one up here called ORDDOC. And you'll notice I have this one set to allocate by document or batch. And if you select that option, you can basically go through and add all your items to the order. And it doesn't check until basically at the end. What you can do is you can allocate your entire document all at once. So it's a little bit faster because it's not checking for the quantity shortages until you've completed the entire document, and then it just does it all at once. With that, you also have this option, I have it checked here, where you can use a separate fulfillment process as well. And that would give you the option to basically separate the allocation and the fulfillment steps if you wanted to. And you can even use a separate window for fulfillment. So you could enter your order in the sales transaction entry window, and then you can actually use a sales order fulfillment window to fulfill that order if you wanted to add some separation to that. And then there's even more, there's a lot of options with that. They make it very flexible so you can match your procedures. We're going to touch on it today, but not go into too much detail, but just so you're aware, with the advanced distribution module, there's even more steps that you can set up because you can use a fulfillment order and you can enable fulfillment workflow. And if you do that, you basically get, I think, up to like 6 different steps where you can match your actual physical fulfillment process in your warehouse, and you can have different steps that have to be completed throughout that whole workflow process. So they give you a lot of different levels that you can use as far as you know, how many steps you want in your process or how simple you want it to be as well. And then the last one that we have here is I have one called ORDMAN for manual, and I have allocate by none in this option. So I've selected that third allocation option here. And if you select that, the order won't be allocated basically after you're actually transferring it to an invoice. At that point, the system will check to see if there's inventory on hand. So you're kind of taking it out of that order entry process. So those are the 3 different allocation options. And what we'll do next is we'll look at how they actually, how they work. So I'm going to close out of the sales order processing setup window, and I'm going to open up the sales transaction entry window here. And the other thing I could do is I could change this if I go back to my, I wanted to point this out too, if I go back to my sales order processing window. Right now I have, as my default, I have this standard, I actually like mine to be one of the new ones that I created. So I'm going to have this order by line item one, since we'll be using that a lot today. Okay, so that now defaulted in for me here. Okay, so I'm going to pick a customer here and just start this order. And what will happen is, so if I pick an item, as an example, I'll pick this first item here. Now this item has quantity available. So you'll notice I just kind of tab right through and I'm done, on to the next item. But now I'm going to select an item that does not have quantity available on it. So I've selected this item here. Now when I tab out of here, I get prompted to tell the system what to do because I don't have, I've entered 1, my quantity available is 0. So I have to override my shortage or create a back order, cancel it. In this case, I'm just going to override it and click OK, and then keep going. So that is using the line item allocation method. So I'm going to just save this into a batch. This transaction. Now what we'll do is we'll go to the next document type that I set up. So that one was line item. So we could see the other option here. So now we can see if I pick order doc, this is the type that I have set up to allocate at the document level. So I'll pick the same customer this time, and I'll pick the same item as well. So I'm going to pick this operating system. And now I'm going to tab through. And you'll notice this time I did not get a shortage option, and it just sped right through that line. So it's not checking at that point. So now what I need to do is I need to allocate, if I could add additional items, of course, so I could just run through and have, you know, a bunch of items on my order. And then when I'm done, I would then need to allocate the entire, basically the entire document. So what I could do is go to those options up here, and I can hit allocate or fulfill. And if I wanted to use a separate fulfillment, I could just allocate, and I could even go to the separate window to do that fulfillment. Or I could just click both, which I will, and I'm going to choose override shortage as my default. Click OK, and then it's going to tell me any item then that it found a shortage, and it'll prompt me, and I can just click that. And now I'm done. So now if I expand this, I can see that it has fulfilled that one item for me. It did it at the document level rather than at the line item level. So I'll save that, and then I'll move on to our third example here. So now we're going to look at a manual one where we have the option set as none. I'm going to choose the same customer and item here so we can see the difference. Okay. So pretty much the same thing here. The only difference is since I have it set to none, if I were to try to allocate it and fulfill it, it's going to tell me this document type is not set up to allocate. So I can't do that here. So what happens is when I actually go through and I transfer it to the invoice, at this point, it's going to check the inventory and it's going to actually allocate and basically assign that inventory to this order so that it can't be used for anything else. So I'll hit transfer here, and now it saw that there's a shortage, so it's prompting me to override it. And then if I look at my transfer log, it was successfully transferred to an invoice, and there it is. So at this point now, it's been allocated and fulfilled invoice level. So it mainly depends on the timing of, when you need that to happen and, how your actual processing works, if you want to have it happen at the actual item level or the document level. Okay. So next we're going to go through how to quickly create an inventory item, and then we'll also look at the default posting accounts and how those affect your transaction posting in the sales transaction entry window. So I'm going to go over to, I have a link here set to my item maintenance window. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the copy feature, which is definitely the fastest way to create an item. So I'm going to create a new item called 256 RAM. So first I just enter my new item number, and then I'm going to select copy up here. And I'm going to copy this item that's already out here, this 256 SD RAM. And then it asks me what I want to copy. If you're familiar with setting up items, then you know that there are a few different windows that you need to go to really completely set up that item number. So this copy feature will give you the option to be able to copy those various windows. So you can pick and choose. If you didn't want to copy the vendor assignment or the price list, you can turn those off and do that manually afterwards. But I'm going to copy everything here. So I'm going to hit copy. And now it filled it in. So, so I could change my description if I wanted, since maybe it's different, maybe everything else is the same. You'll notice it copied the cost. It copied all my, if I had any options, it would copy that as well. And the other thing that it copied are all the other windows. So if I click my go-to and I look at my item currency as an example, it now has a list price that came over from the other item. If I go to the price list, my full price list has been copied, so I don't have to worry about setting all of that up. I can change the percentages or prices if I needed to. If I go to quantities and sites and I look at my assigned warehouses, it has all the same assignments as the other item. And if I go to purchasing, it has my unit of measures. And then if I go to vendors and click assigned, if there were any vendors assigned, it would have those assigned as well here. That's everything I need for this item. So you'll notice that it can save a lot of time, because otherwise I would have had to go to each one of those windows manually and complete the setup in each individual window for that new item number. So in this case, it just copied everything for me. The other thing that it copied were the default posting accounts. So if I click accounts here, I'll see that it has all these default accounts that got filled in automatically based on that other item. Now I could change these. So this kind of leads into the next topic that we'll go through as far as how it grabs those posting accounts. So what will happen is in GP, there's a posting account setup window where it has all the default accounts for the system. And then there's also accounts at the item level. Now when you use an item on a transaction, it'll first look at the item to see what those accounts should be. And if it doesn't find anything, then it goes to the posting account setup window. So we'll fill in maybe some different accounts as an example here. So maybe we want this to be retails parts for sales, and then For cost of goods sold, maybe the same thing. We want this to be cost of goods sold material instead of finished goods. So we'll update those two as an example here. Click OK. And then we can save this here. Now if we go to the sales transaction entry window, and we'll enter a new order here. So now we could pick our new item, which is just the 256 RAM. You'll notice our price came up. We don't have any quantity on hand yet. That's okay, we'll override that shortage here. And everything's all set. So we got our price, our description, everything came over for us. So it's all ready to be used. And if we click this expansion arrow here and go to our detail entry window and then look at distributions, we'll see that it used the new account numbers that I changed for this item. So it's using retail parts for sales, and then it's using material for cost of sales here. So those got updated. So it looked at the item and it saw that it had specific account numbers and it pulled them from that item. What a lot of users will do is they'll create classes. So if you create a new item, it's going to inherit the accounts from the class. So that's another option to make that a little bit easier when you're setting up those default accounts. The other thing I want to point out in this window is when you're first setting up sales order processing, or if ever you get any error messages when you're trying to post related to your distribution accounts, is you want to make sure that in your posting account setup window that you have all of the accounts filled in. So if I go up to Microsoft GP Tools Setup, Posting, and then Posting Accounts, and I look at this inventory menu here, you can see that they correspond to the window that I'm in here on the sales line item distribution entry window. And basically what happens is when you create an order, it's going to look for all these accounts, whether you're using them or not. So some of these you might not ever use. This in use, in service, damaged, maybe even markdowns you might not use, but it still needs an account number. So you'll want to make sure that you always have something in here, even if it's just, like a dummy account, all nines or something. You want to make sure that you have accounts in every single one of these fields here. Otherwise, what will happen is when you transfer that order to an invoice, you'll get an error message about your accounts, and you have to update that invoice. Even if you change the accounts afterwards, it's not going to change the one that's already been transferred to an invoice. It'll fix the problem going forward, but it's not going to fix anything that you've already entered. So that's one thing just to be aware of if ever you run into those posting account problems. So I'll exit out of my posting account setup window here. And I can click save and keep moving on here, and I can add other items or whatever I need to do. So I'll actually add this to the batch that I just created and then just save it here. Okay, so that's how to quickly create a new inventory item and inherit all the setup and everything from another item. And then we also went through and looked at the default posting accounts that are used for those items. So the next thing I want to look at are using substitute items. So there's two different places where you can set up substitute items, and those are at the item level and then at the customer item level. So we're going to look at both of those methods here. So the first one is back in the item maintenance window where we were just at. And what we'll do is first we'll look at just using a regular item substitute without the customer item. So if I do a look up here and let's see, I'm going to go, I'm going to search by short description here because I'm going to look for some tables. So I went by short description, and you'll notice I have two tables here. I have this first model, Office Table 1, and if I click Options here, you'll notice that I have a substitute item here. So if I look up to see what that is, it's Office Table 2. So I have this, I could put in another substitute item if I wanted, but I just have one. So basically Office Table 1 has Office Table 2 as a substitute. So I'm just going to save that and just demonstrate how that would work on an actual transaction here. So I'll go back to the sales transaction entry window. And what we'll do is we'll pick that item here. So we'll pick that first table. And then I'll tab out of here. Okay, so you'll notice what happened is this table 1 does not have any quantity available. So it asked me, you know, since we're allocating at the line item level here, it asked me, do I want to override that shortage or back order it? And in this case, I want to substitute it for that other item. So what I can do is at the bottom, I could click distribute and click OK, and it brings up this distribution entry window. The other thing I could do here is if I had other warehouses, I would see those other warehouses and I could say I want to pull that item from a different warehouse, a different site ID if I needed to. But in this case, I just have the one site ID assigned to this item and there's nothing available on here. So what I want to do is actually look at a substitute. So if I click substitute, it will show me that I have this Office Table 2 available as a substitute, and this item actually has a quantity on hand of 10. So that sounds good to me. I'm going to select that substitute item here, so I'll click OK. Okay, there we go. I didn't have this highlighted. I have to make sure I have that highlighted here. And then insert that substitute item. Oops, sorry, let me start that over. I think I didn't click the right button there. So you'll notice there are a few clicks when you use this method, and that's why I prefer the customer item method. I'll show you that next, because you do have to go to a couple different windows here. So I'll click distribute. Okay. Okay, so I'll click OK. Okay, so now it's showing I have available 10. So I can hit insert. Oh, I have to enter my quantity here. So I had 1 on my order, so I'll pick 1, insert. And now it inserted it down here. So now I have this other item. I could click OK. I can expand this and I'll see that it now substituted the Office Table 2. So it's a little cumbersome, a few clicks and everything, but it still is helpful if you don't have any inventory on hand for a certain item and you want to be able to substitute a different item or recommend a different item, to your customer, then you can still get that on that order. So I'll save this. We can actually use this in our next example. So the other method is to use the customer item instead of just the item substitute. And you can go there through the menu page here. So if I go to cards and then sales, I could go to customer items. So this window is really helpful because you can also set up a different item number. So if your customers refer to items using a different number than the internal item number, you can set that up in here as well. So I'm going to pick Aaron Fitz again. And I'll just pick this first item. So you'll notice that this multi-core processor has a substitute item number assigned to it. So in this case, we have this 500 processor as a substitute. The other thing that is helpful if you use the customer item window is you can put in dates as well. So this substitute item, we've decided that it's only going to be available as a substitution for within April, the rest of April of 2027, and then should no longer be a substitute item. I can also put in a customer item here if I wanted a different item number. I can have a customer item description, and then I have these user-defined fields that I can use if I had additional data I wanted to store related to that item. Okay, so I'm going to save this and we'll go flash back to our transaction that we just saved here, which is our last order with our office table. And we'll pretty much go through the same process here. So I have error fits again, and now I'm going to select that other item that we just looked at so that we can see how the processor substitution would work. So if I pick this processor, now what happened was a window immediately popped up. A substitute item exists, and then it just asks me, do I want to replace it with that processor? So I'll hit yes, and that's all I need to do. So at that point, it saw that there was a shortage for the original processor and that we didn't have any quantity on hand, so it substituted this other item for us. Now, if I were to do the same thing, but maybe I have a date of May 12th of 2027, and I pick that same processor item, now I'm getting a shortage message. So since I had a expiration date on that substitution, it didn't work when I selected May. Okay, I'll delete that one here. So those can be really helpful when you have shortages as well and you want to be able to substitute different items. And those are the two different methods to be able to do that. Okay, so then the next thing we'll do is we'll look at some of these other features that we have out here in sales order processing that are helpful, but that we notice a lot of times aren't used very often. So we just want to go through and show you how to do that. So the first one is how to generate purchase orders from sales documents. So this is another way of handling item shortage, and it can be really helpful because if you're entering a sales order and you don't have any inventory on hand, most likely you're going to need to purchase that inventory, and you can create the purchase order directly off of that sales order document, and then they're linked together. So the other advantage is they're now committed to each other. So when that purchase order gets received and that shipment arrives, it's automatically committed to that sales document. And then there's also a restriction so that the sales document can't accidentally get transferred over to an invoice until that PO has been received. So there's a lot of advantages to using this feature. Okay, so we're going to go back to our sales transaction entry window again. And we'll start a new document, and we'll continue to allocate by line item here. Okay, so what we'll do is we're going to go through and we pick error fits again, and we're going to pick this operating system item again because we know from our experience earlier there's no quantity available. We'll select that. Okay, so I'm going to tab out of here. And so it noticed there's nothing on hand. So what I can do is, instead of overwriting the shortage like I did earlier or substituting it or anything, is I could actually purchase it. So what I need to do is I do need to say back order to be able to purchase this item off of a purchase order. Now, what I do from here, though, I do have an option. I don't have to actually create a back order unless I want to. So I could click OK and then move on and go on with my order. I can leave this in an order status if I'd like, or I could actually hit actions and transfer it to a back order if I wanted it to change. In this case, I'm just going to leave it as an order. And I'm going to put this in our batch so we have that saved on here. Okay, so I'm going to go to actions and purchase so that I can purchase that item. Now, this item had a vendor assigned to it, and it also had a primary vendor in the item site maintenance window. So because of that, it selected that vendor for us. Otherwise, you would have to select the vendor. You would have to go to this PO tab and actually choose what vendor you want to order from. You could still change it if you don't want to order from this vendor or you don't like the cost. You could pick a different vendor even at this point. But it shows that default vendor, and then it'll show me at the item level what the cost is going to be. I could change that if I wanted to. Just gives me some other information here about the actual sales document. So at this point, I'm fine with this vendor, so I'm going to hit generate. And then it also asks me, this is a newer feature because what happens by default is after I create this purchase order, it brings up a navigation list with all the purchase orders. And a lot of users didn't really like that because it takes you to a complete different section of the system. So they added this option here where you can skip displaying it. So I can just hit yes. I don't need that window to pop up. I'll stay where I'm at here. And then I can get this report that'll show me what was successfully created. So in this case, see that we had PO 2077 was created with this item for us with a cost of $100. I can close this out, and then if I go back to my order that I just created here, you'll notice that it has this commitment. I think it's like looks like a chain icon on here. So that's how you could tell that this order has been committed to a purchase order. And if I wanted to see the status of that, I can click this shortcut up here, and I can see what purchase order it was assigned to. So here's my PO number, and I can see the status. So at this point, I've just purchased it. I have not received it or anything yet. So if I try to go to actions and transfer it over to an invoice, I'll print this log to the screen here. You'll notice I got an error and 0 documents transferred successfully. So it's letting me know it's, it can't be created yet. So it hasn't been received yet, that purchase order. We don't have the inventory. So it stops the user from accidentally transferring that over. So what we would need to do is receive that purchase order. So I'm going to go over to transactions, purchasing, purchase order, and just go to my last one here. And you can see this is our PO that it just created. And it has the same symbol here, and the link works both ways. So if I wanted to, I could click my sales commitment link here, and I can see what sales order it has been linked to. So I can see that on the sales side, we have this order out there, and I can drill into it if I wanted to, and I could see the actual sales order, what else is on there, any other information that I want. Okay, so we're good with this. At this point, what we want to do is receive this, this purchase order so that we can move through the process on the sales side. So I'm going to go to actions, and I'm going to receive the PO here. So I'll receive the quantity, and then I'm just going to post this just so we have that posted out there. And I don't need all my posting reports, so I'm going to cancel out of those. Okay, so now if I go back to my order that we have out here, 1009, and if I want to look at this status again, now you'll notice that the commitment status has changed. So the commitment status now shows as fully received. So that's how the system knows that you've received it, and now it's ready to move on. There's no quantity left on the purchase order. So at this point, I can click Actions Transfer. I can transfer to the invoice again. And now I would expect that it's able to successfully transfer. So now we have one document transferred successfully. And then it brought that invoice up for me. So now I can see, here's my invoice. And it has the one document on there that came over after the purchase order was received. So this is a really helpful tool to kind of help in the communication between the purchasing and the sales departments, and just to cut back on any double entry as well. And it's pretty easy to use. Okay, so we went through generating purchase orders from sales documents. And then our next topic will be consolidating multiple orders into a single invoice. So this is a great feature that you can use. It does require setting up a fulfillment order, but once you've done that, you can make it as simple, or you can have as many steps as you want on that process. And if you have multiple sales orders out there, you can then consolidate them all into one single invoice. So I'm just going to point out the setup related to that. So if I go to Tool Setup Sales, Sales Order Processing, you'll notice that I do have a fulfillment order out here. So I have fulfillment order, and I've enabled my workflow, which you do need to check to be able to run this consolidation process. However, I've made mine a little simpler. So if I go to this workflow button here, you'll see that there's several steps. There's 6 steps that you can use. And these are all customizable as far as which ones you want. And this way you could split up all these steps if you wanted with different users. And then it also timestamps each step and each stage as you move through your distribution processing sequence here. So I've actually just kept on a few just to show this example, but I could, of course, have these all checked if I wanted to go through each one of these steps. So I'll click OK here, just to point that out, and we'll go through and see what that looks like. So I'll go back to my sales transaction entry window here. And I'm going to change this, though. Instead of an order, I'm going to film an order. And then I'm going to use that type ID that we just looked at a moment ago. Okay, and I'll keep picking on your fits today. And then I'll just create that batch here. Actually, I'll put today's date on here in case there's other things out there. We could save that. Okay. All right, so I'm just gonna maybe just randomly pick a couple items on here. And pick one more. Okay, so we have 2 items out here for this fulfillment order for Aaron Fitz. And you'll notice at the bottom we have this document status. It's telling me it's ready to print my picking ticket. So that's the next thing I'm going to do. Anyway, I'm going to print my picking ticket here. And I'll just use this template. Okay, so I printed my picking ticket, and then you'll notice that if I pull up this, this fulfillment order, notice my status has now changed to the next step in that workflow that I had defined. So it's now moved to unconfirmed pack. So the printing ticket has been printed, but it's not confirmed. It hasn't been packed yet. If I click this document status, I can see, this is what's helpful. It'll give me a date and a timestamp and a user ID. So it'll show me, when my picking ticket was printed, and then as I move through all the steps of that workflow, it'll show me the time and the date and the user that completed each step. So it leaves a really nice trail on your orders. So I'm going to then create another order using the same customer here so that we can see how they can consolidate together. Okay, so I have a 3rd item, and might as well do one more here. Okay, so now we have a total of 2 orders with 2 items on each one. And I'm going to print this picking ticket as well. Of course, I could print these at the batch level if I wanted to. I don't have to print each individual one on here. Okay, so I printed my picking ticket for both of those orders. So now what I could do is move on. I'm going to go over to the sales window here and show you this other window. So the next step is in this bulk confirmation window under sales transactions. And if I go in here, I'll see that I have my next action available to me that I defined with my fulfillment order type. So I have confirm pack as my next step. And this is also where you would see all those other workflow steps if we wanted to include the requirement, to confirm the picking, and then some of those other steps that were out there as well. But in this case, we'll just do confirm pack. So I'm going to hit read display, and you'll notice that the system can see that there's those 2 orders that we just created, 1015 and 1016. And those fulfillment orders both are in the stage where they need to go through the confirm pack. So I'll let them stay checked here, and then I'll just hit process. And then I get a log just telling me there are no exceptions. And now this is empty because I went through that step and I don't have any other orders out there that need to have a confirm pack completed. So I'll clear this out, and I'm going to go to the next step. So now I'm ready to confirm my shipment. So if I hit redisplay, I'll see that those documents have now moved into this stage of the workflow. So now I have confirm ship as my option, and I see those. So now what I can do is I can click this checkbox to create a combined invoice. So I want to combine both of these orders into a single invoice, and I just need to tell the system the type. So I'm just going to pick a standard invoice, and then the destination batch. So I'm going to create a new one just as an example here for fulfillment invoices. Okay. So that's all I need to do there. I have them marked. So now I just hit process. And then I'll get a report that'll kind of summarize everything for me, and it'll show me what it did. So in this case, we had 2 orders, and these were the totals on both of those orders. And now we have an invoice. So you'll notice that this invoice 2278 has the total from both of those orders. So if I want to move through and look at that invoice, I can go back to my sales transaction entry window here. And let me just change my view so I can see all transactions here instead of restricting it to that batch. And now I see here's 2278. Okay, so I can see that it took all the 2 items from each order and it combined them. So now we have all 4 items on this single invoice that we're able to send over to Aaron Fitz. So everything looks good there. We could print and email the invoice or whatever we need to do at this point. Or we could just post it. If I go back to this batch window here, I can post my invoice, and it pulled all the accounts from those different items from their posting accounts like we looked at earlier. And now it posted that invoice for us. And here's all the accounts that it went to. Okay, so that's the process. And as I mentioned, that can be tailored, to match whatever your procedures are in your warehouse. So you can expand and have additional steps, or you can have it kind of a simple process like the one I did today, where it just had the printing the packing picking ticket and then confirming that it's been packed, and then at that point combining the orders together into a single invoice. And then, so that brings us to our last topic, which is how to create sales returns from invoices. So there's a couple different ways you can do this, and we'll go through an example without using RMA, but that is a module you can use if you need more of some more steps and more information and procedures related to your returns. So you could actually set up returns management authorization. But today we're going to just look at the standard sales transaction way of creating a return, but just make sure that you're aware of this quick way to do it. So if I go to the sales transaction entry window, I'm going to change my type to return. And then I'm going to go up here and I'm going to go to additional, create return. So that's fine. I'm not going to use RMA. So I'm going to uncheck this here, and I'm just going to use the standard sales order processing return. So I'll pick my customer. And now what I could do is I can find an invoice that's been posted that I want to return off of. So if I go down to the bottom of the list, I should see here's the invoice that we just posted, 2278. So I can select that invoice. And I could create my return directly off of this invoice. I can, mark all of my items, or if I just want to return, a couple of these items here, I can mark the ones that I want to return and then hit post. Okay, so it told me my new return document here. Okay, so I can see that now I have a return out here, and it basically copied my posted invoice for me. It took everything from that invoice and just copied it over, including the items, the prices that were on the invoice. I could make any edits or changes if I needed to at this point. Otherwise, if I'm fine, I can move forward and just post my return. So that definitely speeds up your data entry since you don't have to manually enter all these items on your sales transaction to be able to create that return. Okay, so that completes all of the topics that we wanted to go through related to sales order processing and looking at some of the areas that aren't always used and just some tips and tricks to speed up some of your data entry. So at this point, I'll open it up if you have any questions that we can answer today.
Thanks for watching. To learn more about our products, visit www.crestwood.com. Hope to see you there soon.